Sachem Public Library. How are you? My name's Daniel White, first. Hi. The Sachem Public Library Comic-Con is something I look forward to every year. So much. It's such a great time, and I get to meet so many talented people and amazing people. But we're going to do it a little bit differently this year, and I'm glad we are, because I still think we need to have some fun and do some art and talk about comic books, which is something that I talk and think about a lot, like too much. But so today I'm going to draw Batman because, I haven't drawn Batman now in a couple weeks, and that's just too long for me. I need to draw Batman. So I'm going to draw a sequential page, and what that means is it's going to be like a little story, a one-page story. There'll be a beginning, middle, and an end, hopefully. And I'm not going to really explain too much along the way. I'm just going to do it and have some fun, and I hope you have fun watching, and I hope you feel inspired and turn me off and go get a blank sheet of paper and, do some drawing yourself. I think you should do that. So I need to get to work because there's a lot of work to do, and I gotta start right now. Okay, bye. All right, so I have a couple of sketches. This is gonna be like a little version of the page, and then you see these 5 panels. I wanted to figure out what goes in them, so I did them still small, but plotted out the story here. This is gonna go over here. And then these 3 panels will be these. So now I gotta put it on the big sheet of paper. Now that I have my little story as a sketch, I'm gonna start to lightly plan where things are gonna go on the bigger sheet of paper. Just super gently draw. Just shapes. Figure out where all the panels are gonna go. And then I'll worry about breaking out a ruler when this is done. Now that I have the page all lined out and the little story, now it's time to put the little story here and just draw it a lot better, or better than that. Let's try.
Promoting and highlighting the fact that they're going to be starting this gimmick up.
My issue was not polybag, but this sports thing was tucked into it, and I was so confused whenever I was looking through there and trying to figure out, like, what is this? Is this something that just got jammed in a back issue? Very bizarre.
So let's take it to the gatefold Jim Lee Deathblow cover.
This is probably my peak as a Jim Lee fan. Deathblow was everything I wanted in a comic. I liked the style that he was drawing in. And this is also when I kind of
that is highlighted there. We're going to start to see the escalation in the value. The other thing I have to point out is young Eddie P, little 12-year-old Eddie P, didn't have the sophistication to appreciate this Gil Kane piece right here. It's the first Gil Kane I probably saw consciously with a name attached. And I'm like, what are these?
At this point. But the Hulk, he's much better as an artist now. And I love McFarlane's Hulk, especially the gray Hulk there. this was a cool issue, and they go all out because Spider-Man is a powerhouse in this issue, so it's kind of no holds barred. Spider-Man knocks the Hulk into orbit.
Yes.
And I remember the moment of like Hulk floating in outer space, like, how am I gonna die up here? Am I gonna turn into Bruce Banner when the sun comes around the horizon and I'll explode?
And like he and Larry Stroman, that was like my limit at my young age for what I could kind of put up with.
Darkhawk was a really cool book. I had the same reading with that. You know, new number one, I would try everything, and that one connected. It felt like almost like New Warriors, like one of these books that actually shows up and grows an audience because it's a pretty decent read. I'm curious to revisit that now because who knows how it would hold up. But
also this too. Man.
Yeah. It was always great to see pencils. Like the early Wizards that I would get hold of, seeing pencils was huge to me. There's a few insightful things. One, he shared a studio with Al Williamson. That seems like the coolest thing you could do as an artist. He mentions drawing an Ann Nocenti story for an upcoming Akira tribute issue. Are you aware of that issue? I wonder if that ever came out.
Developed some other supporting characters, and we put it on paper. And those were basically, along with like a 3-page sequence that was in the old Foom magazine that was like a sample Spider-Man plot. Those were the sample pages that I showed Jim Shooter. I look back on them now, they were light on backgrounds, they were, you know, technically were a mess. But he liked the dynamics of it, he liked the figure work of it, because even then I was a big Buscema devotee. And so there was a lot of that in there. And he was certainly welcome. But I mean, back then, maybe more so than now, I can't really speak to that. I mean, the deadline was, the dreaded deadline doom was a real thing. You were producing a product that had to get out monthly, or they were going to run a reprint of Millie the Model. I mean, there was no, you know, there was no just letting the retailers know it was going to be out 2 months later instead of when we promised it. It just wasn't going to happen. So, I mean, there were a few times where I came, you know, dangerously close to shipping. I think we missed shipping once. We're mocking and derision and stuff, and it's like, yeah. And have you ever listened to song lyrics from back then too?
You got to find the mute button on Facebook, man. Like, it's going to make your life better.
It's insightful as far as, you know, what people are finding, how they're relating to the work, and what's interesting to me with comics is that you don't. I mean, granted, there are people who are never going to watch Citizen Kane because it's in black and white. I get it, you know, but you know, in comics, it just seems to be like I don't remember it being as visceral. The you know, attacking what came before being as visceral as it is now. I mean, everybody who gets into comics is always going to love the comics that they discovered. Okay, that's why my living on this stuff. Then it was a direct infusion. You know, what I find funny about my own career and the way it's being viewed is that when I came in the 80s, they said I was trying to rediscover the 60s. They said, oh, he's doing the 60s pastiche.
Well, how about this? Like, you got in the early 80s,
right?
And what Marvel calls the incentive program, like that comes later. Like, you were a part. Did you see a change in your career?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I definitely benefited from a lot of things that Shooter instituted.
What would that have been? 86, like trying to compete with, you know, the Frank Miller DC.
It would have been in that immediately filling out new character agreements whenever we created a new character. Early on Spider-Man and certainly on Thor and everything. Anytime we came up with a new idea, they wanted us to fill out the paperwork and stuff, and you were an idiot if you didn't. There was some other point I was going to make about it. Oh, I mean, at one point, it would have been later in the 80s, maybe the early 90s, because Tom and I, mostly Tom, quite honestly, created and I helped design the new Warriors. We created Night Thrasher when we were given credit for creating the new Warriors because he came up with the name and we brought the team together and stuff. So there's some dodgy math that goes on there.
Sure.
There's no doubt about it.
That's why they call it an incentive and not a royalty.
Exactly. And there's a lot of people who, you know, he was the best combination of fan and professional I've ever met in my life. And I only had a chance to really spend time in a room with him very few times, but what a great guy. I know for a fact that he would, after he had passed, was reading his diary, and she just saw his journal, in his journal, how the last at Marvel, they're just broken. You know, passages would start with, I had to fire so-and-so today, you know, people who were close friends. And one of those cases for Mark was that he had to call me and say, the work's not there, I'm sorry. You know, we really tried, it's just not there. And, you know, I tried to make him feel as okay about it as I could, because Mike Carlin called. Mike Carlin had worked at Marvel. He was a Grunwald guy, really. I mean, he had been Grunwald's assistant for years. And he had been having great success as the editor, the on-hands editor of the Superman titles. And he was now more of an executive editor or something. And I called Mike Carlin and I said, I'm in. If you'll have me, I'm in, you know. So that's how I ended up over there. And it just, things got worse. I mean, just things got worse at Marvel. I mean, it was awful. I heard that there were a couple of cents of the bullpen. I mean, you know, Stan wasn't there, Roy wasn't there, but there was this generation of guys, you know, even Shooter to a large degree, whatever you think of him in some of his business decisions and his ability to play well with others. I mean, he brought a lot of good things to the industry, you know, like incentives and things like that. And certainly he worked to bring page rates up and all that kind of stuff. And I you know, I owe him a lot working under his Marvel, but wonderful. It just made you, it made you feel like a part of something to wear a Marvel jacket with a logo on it, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that I got to experience that at all is just fantastic to me. I got to do conventions with the black costume, where there was this one gentleman named Scott Leva.
The thing, and he had that gravity, which is important, of them leaning against the counter at the chocolate shop, you know, and talking, and you know, oh, this guy thinks he knows what he's talking about because he's acting all cool and stuff. And it was just because he's doing that lean and that perfect, like, real with Lucy.
The other big takeaway that I think about whenever I look at your work in relation to Harry Lucy is the storytelling of background characters, where this is something I see in a lot of your strips, where there are characters playing baseball and catching ball and hitting the ball and all this stuff going on in the background, and then there's like the A story that's more in the foreground.
Just attention to detail, attention what's around you, you know. Archie's walking down the street thinking about something. I felt that was my neighborhood. You know, like, I get this. I got this thing. And so
You always keep it relegated to the comics and all that. What was the influence of like just Mexican American culture, and will lowrider culture fit into that? Like,
yeah.
Let's get that piece of Love and Rockets on the record.
Right. Well, that happened.
I didn't know he was doing the primitive art thing. Yeah, so it was Panther, then Pettibone later. Sean Carey. They were just the artists who did a lot of the LA punk stuff. It was just fun because we're like, this is like comics, man. This is comics and punk. See, I knew it. Rock and roll, punk, wrestling, stupid science fiction movies. It all belongs. It's all the same. That kind of what kind of also stirred the Love and Rockets thing. Like, this is all belongs, and it's all to be taken seriously. And so that helped me a lot, you know. Anything that was...
You figured, like, your stories with wrestling are kind of where wrestling is now, in that we get, you know, wrestlers talking about road stories, behind the scenes stories.